Hello, this is Al Judge. Welcome to another lesson from my book, From Photos to Art with Photoshop. In this lesson, we're going to recreate the cover to this book as a way to demonstrate the use of layers. Now we have two image layers here on the front of the cover. This main image, which is a Native American dancer, and the secondary image, which is a small inset of the original photo from which this image was created. So we're going to start off by preparing these two images that are going to go on the cover before we start assembling the cover. The very first thing I'm going to do is look at this original image. In a different lesson, different chapter, we isolate this dancer from the background. It's the lesson on layer masks. Rather than include that here, I'm just going to take the result of that effort. And we have just the dancer in his costume on a transparent background. Now, what I want to do next is add a gradient fill layer. And I want the black and white gradient fill, and I want to make that radial. I want to bring it down below the dancer, and now I want to position the dancer relative to the gradient. I don't want him lined up perfectly with the center. I can use my arrow keys on my keyboard to fine-tune this. Okay, that's about where I want him. Now I want to make sure that this image stays in that relationship to the gradient. If I were to move both together to a different file, this gradient would want to fill the entire canvas, and it would become centered with the dancer again. I don't want that. I want to. So before we use this image in our book cover, I want to combine these layers into a single image. And I can do that by going up here, Layer, coming down to Merge Visible, and I get a single layer. So I'll be able to use this layer on my cover just as it is. And now I want to go back to my original image. And actually this is not the original image, this is an enhanced image. Did quite a bit of work enhancing it. But for the purposes of the cover, I want it to look more like the original image. I do have the original, but I wanted to show you that you can use adjustment layers in both directions. You can use it to enhance an image, and you can use it to degrade an image. And sometimes when you degrade an image, you learn quite a bit about how the adjustment layers work. So I'm going to take this image and I'm going to add a brightness contrast adjustment layer. And I'm going to tone the contrast all the way down. It makes this somewhat dull. I'm going to bring up another adjustment layer. This time levels. As I move this pointer on the bottom from the right, which is pure white, toward the center, you'll see again it dulls down a bit. And also here on the this midpoint, I can move that in slightly. And it has another. Actually, if I go the other direction, I get a somewhat dull appearance. I'm going to do that. And finally, I'm going to come into Hue Saturation. I'm going to change to the red channel because his red costume is the dominant feature here. And I'm going to reduce the saturation of that costume a bit. Before we put it on the cover, I want to add a border. So we're going to come Image, Canvas Size, and we're on Relative, and I'm going to add 0.3. And I'm going to make that border white and evenly distributed all the way around the image. So I'll click here. Now I have a white border. Now I want to put a little black trim on that very edge to help emphasize the edges of this image. So I'll do that again, Canvas Size. This time I'll just do 0.1 in each direction, each dimension. So I'm going to change that to black. So when I click that, I now have my simulation of my original image with a little bit of a border on the side. It's going to help it stand out on the cover. So now I have the inset image. Go back to this image. I now have this prepared, and I have this image prepared. And now I'm ready to assemble my book cover. So the first thing I want to do is create a new file. And we'll go to my book cover preset. And I'm going to call this Photos to Art. So I'm creating a new file. And now I'm ready to start assembling pieces. And what I'm actually going to do first is get the backdrops and the text in here. And I'm going to do everything on an individual layer so we can separate each thing. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new layer. And this layer is going to be for the series title. Backdrop. Now that is going to be a 1/2 inch wide black backdrop here. First thing I want to do is I want to add my rulers by going to View, Rulers. And when I have my rulers up, I can drag guidelines. And I want to come down here roughly a 1/2 inch. And I want to come to the bottom, which is 11.5, so I come back up to 11 roughly. Come from the sides, 1/2 inch. And the other side, that's 8.75, so I want to come to 8.25 roughly. And now that I have the guidelines in a rough position, I'm going to zoom in. Okay, now that we're zoomed in, I'm going to grab my line. As we start to move it, we'll see our dimension up there, and I'm going to come right to a 1/2 inch. I'll do the same thing here. 1/2 inch. And now we'll go down to the opposite corner. Move this line. We want to get 11 right on the money. There we go. And this one we want to get 8.25. And there we are. So now we can flip screen, and we have guidelines exactly a 1/2 inch from each edge. When I submit my book cover to Amazon, I'm not allowed to have any text within a 1/2 inch of any edge, so that in the printing process they can trim it up without worrying about hitting text. So now I have my guidelines laid out to limit the area that I have to work with. And the first thing I want to do is I want to put a half inch wide border here for my series title. Could bring another line down to the 1 inch mark, but I can also just come over here and grab the rectangular marquee tool. I'm going to start here right at the edge. And if I go to the opposite side, it'll stop at that edge, so I don't have to be careful how I get there. And I want the height of this banner to be a half inch roughly. And it's not, in this case, it doesn't have to be precise, so I'm going to stop. Play around with it a little bit. It looks like that's about as good as I'm going to get, and that's fine. So now that I've created this half inch rectangular marquee, I want to fill it with black. So I come to my paint bucket and I just click in there, and I now have a black background that I can use. I'm going to select, deselect to get rid of the marquee. I'm going to turn off the background layer. And we'll see that this particular layer is transparent except for that half inch black band. Now I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to call it main title backdrop. Okay, this time what I'm looking for is a black banner here, backdrop, that's roughly 2.6 inches high. Now I can create that several different ways. You'll notice as I move my cursor up and down, I'm getting a line here on this ruler. The bottom of my canvas is at 11.5 inches. So if I were to come up 2.6 inches, I would come to 8.9. You can see that on that ruler right now. Okay, that's one way that I could draw this marquee. Just start right at 8.9 here at the edge and just drag down to this far corner. Okay, that's one way. I'm going to step back. And the other way I can do it is I can just start the marquee down here at the edge, the bottom edge, and move up and watch my dialog here. I get a height of 2.6. And that's about as close as I'm going to get. Now, we could just fill this marquee the same way we did in the last example for this banner at the top on this layer. But instead, in this case, I'm going to turn this back on, and we're going to copy part of the background layer. Now, the marquee here is above all these layers. It's going to affect whichever one is active. So if I had this second layer active, you could see it would be grabbing the transparent area. Since it's a background, it's going to select a white area. And so if I now have the background as the active layer, and I go to Layer, New, Layer via Copy, I've just copied a portion of that background layer. If I turn off the background, we'll see. So we have a transparent sheet except for this bottom part, which is all white. I can just come in here, since our foreground color is black, I can grab the paint bucket, I can click anywhere in there, and now I have a black backdrop. So this is just a different way of creating it. I'm going to get rid of that first layer I created up here. I'm going to name this main title backdrop. So I have two layers for where I'm going to put text above those layers. Right now everything else is still transparent. I'm just going to turn the background layer on here to give an idea how it might look so far. So the very next thing I want to do is I want to create some text layers. So I'm going to come in here. They're all going to be horizontal text. And I'm going to start with just common font like Arial. And I'm probably going to go about 18 points the first time here. I'm going to draw a box up in this area. And I'm going to type in what's going to go on that banner. And it says Quick Start Guidebooks. Now you'll notice you're not seeing anything, and the reason is that the text is black. So we need to change that to white. Come down here. Now we're still not seeing the text. I'm going to click on that and we're still not seeing it. And the reason is because it's below the banner here. So I need to move it up so the text is above the banner. And now you can see your Quick Start Guidebooks. Now I could just make that a layer, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add more text to that layer. So I come in and I double click on the T, I'll space over some, and type in Book 1. So that's the text that I want on this layer. I'm going to spread that out a little bit. I can reposition that text. I can bring that in a bit, commit to that text, and I can move it up and down. When the move tool is active, I can use my arrow keys on my keyboard to fine tune the position. And I'm just going to leave it here right now. Okay, now I want to come down and I want to create another layer. Or another text layer that says from photos to art with, and I'll commit to that, and I can move it as I choose. I'll just move it up here for now. And then the final one on the backdrop will be another text layer that says Photoshop. Just the one word. And that one I'm going to make a bit larger to start with. We'll make that 48. Well, need to come in here again, double click on that layer, and change the font size to 48. Okay. Now again, these are just approximate locations. We haven't done anything fancy with them yet. They're just establishing what the text is. It's time to start bringing images to the cover. We'll start with the main image, and we'll just drag it onto the cover. As you can see, it's way too large for the cover, so we're going to shrink this image a bit. And now we can go Edit, Free Transform, and grab our handles, hold down the Shift key, and make that image a bit smaller. Then we'll bring it up here in the rough location and size it down a bit more. And now we need to move that image below the text banners, backdrops. So we have the image there. Go back to fit screen so we can get a better look at it. And now let's bring in the inset picture. This is our original image with a border around it. We'll drag that to our cover. Place it in here somewhere. That's not too bad. It's a little large, but let's rotate it first. We'll go, actually we can do everything at once with free transform. I'm going to rotate it about 15 degrees, and you can see the black box just outside of my cursor telling me my angle. There I am, 15 degrees. So I'm going to release my mouse, and let's size that down a bit. So I'm going to hold down the Shift key and shrink it down a bit. We'll apply that, and we'll move it around with the move tool activated. Now actually I think I can go back up a little in size, so we're going to do that. Free transform again. Shift key down to maintain the aspect ratio. And there we've repositioned our image. Now, in the book I talked about how to fill in this white area on the side. After some reflection, I think there's a better way to do this. So we have an area of roughly 9 inches by 9 inches where we want to have our main image. If we do this a little differently, we can have the gradient extend up into the top here and along the side without having to do an extra step. So I'm going to remove this image, which we can find down here. We'll turn it off first, make sure it's the image. Yes, we're gonna just turn that off for now. I'm going to work on a new approach to this. We know that this image is going to fit in an area that's roughly 9 by 9, but we also know it's going to be offset to the right side, and it's going to be offset from a radial gradient. So what I want to do is I want to expand this canvas size quite a bit. So I'm going to make the canvas, actually first, because the image is fairly large, let's cancel that. And let's get the image down to about the size we need it. So I'm going to come into image size. I'm going to make the height about 8 inches. And that gives us a really high resolution here. So we're going to bring that down to 320. And we're going to leave this on automatic. So we brought our image down. Now what I want to do is I want to make my canvas 12 by 12. And let it move out in all directions. So next, I'm going to add my gradient layer. And we're going to use this black and white gradient. And we're going to make it radial. And I want to soften it up a bit. I want to change this midpoint to be closer to the black, to bring the black in. Not quite as dark. And in fact, I think I'd like to change that black to a shade of gray. I want them fairly dark, but not as dark. Okay. So it's a noticeable gradient. Well, let's try that. So now I'm going to bring that below my image. We can see our dancer here. I'm going to grab this layer. And I'm going to move him around. And I'd like him down here. What I'm trying to suggest is that he's moving into a time tunnel of some sort. It's going to be very subtle on the cover, but I think people subconsciously do pick that up. So I have him in the position I want relative to the gradient. If I crop this image, that gradient's going to reposition itself. So I need to take these two layers and combine them. Merge layers. So now I've locked the position of the dancer relative to the gradient. Now I can come in and crop, and I want to make sure I keep that a square ratio. So I'm just going to click on that. And I can see my rule of thirds. And I want to grab my dancer and move him right along one of these lines. Actually, that's much too tall. So I'm going to bring this in. And we'll try repositioning him again. We'd like him closer to the bottom of the image. The changes I'm making here are in anticipation of how it's going to look on the cover. I'm going to bring this back in just a little more. Keep him along that line. And I'm going to crop it right there. Now I'm not quite sure how it's going to look on the cover, but we'll take a shot at it. See how it looks. So when I go back to this, I want to eliminate this layer that I currently have. I'm going to just take it to the trash can. And I want to bring in that new layer that I just did. So I'm going to drag it up and bring it in. Not too bad. Now, again, I want to make sure I'm a little off center here. So I'm going to bring my line over to 4 3/8, which is about the center here. And he definitely is to the right of center, and that's fine. And maybe he's pretty good where he is. So I'm going to get rid of that guideline. Okay, I want to shrink this down a bit. Okay, and I want to do edit, free transform. And I want to raise him up a bit and make him a little bit bigger. I want him to fill this as much as I can. Alright, that looks pretty good. Okay, I'm going to lock in that transformation. We're going to come back up to fit screen. And you can see now we have some of the gradient going above the banner, and we extend out pretty close to the edge with a nice gradual transition. So I'm going to grab this other inset layer, and now that I have this where I really want it, looking pretty much how I want it, I'm going to position this a little more accurately. Use my arrow keys on the keyboard to fine tune it. So I have my inset image about where I want. I actually think I could make it a little bigger, so I will. I will come to Edit, Free Transform, and I'm going to raise that up a bit. Okay, that's looking pretty good now. I'll lock that in. Now another thing I'd like to do here, just to give it some emphasis, is I want to add an effect. And the effect I want to add is a drop shadow for that entire image. And I want it to be fairly subtle. But I want it to be effective. Okay, there we go. That's the drop shadow for that. Now we're looking pretty good. Now we can come back and fine tune our text layers here. I'm going to start with the Quick Start guidebooks, and we can find that very quickly because Photoshop typed that in for us. I'm going to double click on the T, and I'm going to reposition this text box so it goes to these guidelines, and I'm going to change the text. It's a little embarrassing, but I did the original cover on my PC, and this is a Mac that I'm working on, and unfortunately I don't have all the fonts, the same fonts. So the font that I wanted to use is not here. I will pick another one just to demonstrate the principle. Now let's say we pick Myriad Pro. Actually, I want something that looks a little more interesting than that. So let me see if I can't find something else. How about this Papyrus? It's different. So I'm going to now stretch this out. First of all, the text could be larger. So I'm going to double click, and I'm going to make this 24. So yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm going to spread the text out so it is about as large as far as I can get without going across either guideline. I think that's about as good as I'm going to do with this text. So I'm going to commit to that, and I'm going to use my keyboard arrow keys to position it better. Now I have my other text layers here. I want to start with this From Photos to Art with, and I'm probably going to find out I don't have that font either. Something close at least. Let me just take regular there. And I'm going to change that size to 36. And I'm going to spread this box out, just like I did with the other one. Come all the way to the guidelines. Okay, then the other thing I want to do is I want to change the color of this text. And I'm going to use red color. I want to make it pure red. So these two numbers become 0, and this becomes 255. I now have pure red for that text. And I can go up here if I want. I could spread those letters out a bit more if I choose to. So I'm going to come down here and add a little spread to it. Okay, I've spaced them out a little more. Now I'm going to commit to that, and I'm going to choose the word Photoshop, and we'll use the same font. Well, we make it much larger. We'll start with 72. And I have to increase the text box here to have it show up. And I want to bring my text box to the guideline so that I'm sure I'm centered. Okay, and in this case, the white text is fine. But I can also do something else here. I can make it a taller text if I want. And I can also spread it out like I did my other text. And let's go actually a little further than that. Let's go to 50 this time. So I've changed the appearance of the text quite a bit. It doesn't match the actual cover perfectly, but it's because I don't have the fonts loaded on this computer. I'm going to use my arrow keys to position that a little better, to keep it as close to this guideline as I can without actually going into it. We're progressing pretty well here. We have most of what we need. Now the other thing is I did a little line, white line here and here. And before I do that, I'm going to raise this text up again, this quick start guide. Raise it just a little bit higher. Now that white line is a shape tool. I go to line tool, and I want it to be white, and the stroke is white, that's fine. And I want it to be, let's say, 3 pixels to start with. I'm sorry, went to the wrong place. 3 pixels over here. And now I'm just going to draw a line here from end to end. See what it looks like. And it's a bit faint, so I'm going to come back and try that again, only a little heavier. So I'm going to go to my line tool, and I'm going to make it 6 pixels. And we'll draw that again. As you can see, the little box here on the right of my cursor is telling me my angle, and I want to get it exactly horizontal. So I'm reading 0, 0 now, and I'm going to release. And that's not too bad. So I'm going to use my arrow keys to raise that up. Right about there. I'm going to duplicate that letter. And I'm going to use the second one up the top. And again, I'll use my arrow keys to fine tune that. No, actually, it's not quite the right place because it should go end to end. That's better. So now the only thing I have left to do is add my own name to this. So I'm going to create another text layer, and I'm just going to do the box out here to start with. Oh, my problem is that my text is way too large. I'm going to come down here to 18, just type in L, judge. Now it's a bit faint. I'm going to make it larger. Make it 30. See how that looks. That's not too bad on size. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an effect. I'm going to put a stroke around it. A stroke just means an outline. Very thin outline. And right now that stroke is 3 pixels and the color is black. Now I'm going to make it a few more pixels. Let's go to 5 pixels. Okay, so it has some definition to it. Again, I'm not using exactly the same font that I used on the original cover. I'm using what I have available. And now I'm going to move this into place up here. And we're going to add another effect. Add the drop shadow. Okay, so now all I have to do is come up here and go to View, Clear Guides, and I have a book cover that's very similar to the real book cover. Text isn't quite the same, but the process is the same, so you can see how it was done. The other thing is, since I did this original image, I've since added an icon here. And all I needed to do was just extend this black up and drop in the icon. So that was no big deal. Just add one more image. So at any rate, here we are. We have a book cover. And even though it took a bit of time to demonstrate this, the actual process of creating it, the original image, was about 12 minutes. So you can see you can do some pretty interesting things. And now, because we have everything on layers, move that up a bit so you can see more of it. You still can't see the whole collection of layers, so I'm going to move it up even further. Okay, we can see most of it. I think I can turn off the background layer now. And in that case, we may be able to see all the layers. I think we can now. Now all the layers are visible here, so you can see we had a number of layers. We have them in an order that works. We need to have the 2 images below these backdrops, and we need to have the text above the backdrops. So we've done that. So at any rate, you can see the process of creating a book cover, and in it we created quite a few layers and we did a lot of interesting things along the way. I'm going to do one more thing before we leave this. I want to close all these files. Close all. Not going to save anything. I want to open up a different file. I'm going to go to Browse and Bridge, and I want to open this file. Okay. Now we're missing certain text here, but again, not this Mac computer doesn't have all the fonts that my PC does. But I can show you that this is a template that I use for a series of books. This icon is on every one of the books. There's 9 books total, and each book is numbered, and the titles are in the same kind of font, and they have the same special effects with a drop shadow and an embossed look. And we have a number of images on the cover. So what I do when I create a new book in this series is I start by closing out the images, and I add other images. I'm not sure what this one's from, but it's from another one of the books in the series. Okay, there's one and there's another. So these are 2 images that are used in a different book. And all I have to do is turn those layers back on. And then I can come in here and I can click on this Book 7 text layer, which I'm not going to do because it's telling me I don't have that font. But I can change that book number by just clicking on that type and changing it. Actually, I'm going to click on it. Okay, that's how my fonts are missing, so I'm going to cancel. Then I go into the title and I do the same thing. And all my effects are preserved. All I do is change the words. So in this case, well, I'm going to risk losing that. It's going to choose a different font here that it has. So I'm going to say OK. OK, and I'm just going to say this book was, the title of this book is Composition and Artistic Considerations. Now all I have to do is work with the font size. Let's leave it there. I'm going to change this around a little. Put that on a separate line. Put this on a separate line. And then even though this is not the exact same font, it's not the same kind of appearance, you can get the idea of what how simple it is to change a book cover when you have a series and you use a template like this. So now we're going to call it quits on this topic of creating book covers and using layers to do it. I hope this has been a valuable lesson, and I'll see you next time when we discuss adjustment layers.